The wind rattled the bar's rusted sign as I pulled into the empty parking lot, the neon glow casting long, distorted shadows over the cracked pavement. My shift had just begun, and I already knew it was going to be another long, quiet night. The dead-end tavern wasn't much, just a forgotten dive clinging to the edge of a highway that had long lost its relevance. A couple of truckers, a few lost souls, and the occasional regular too deep in their cups to go home. That was the usual crowd. I locked my car and hurried inside, the crisp night air pressing at my back like unseen hands. The scent of old beer and stale cigarettes welcomed me like an old friend. It was my place, in a way. I knew every inch of it, every creaky floorboard, every broken bar stool, every faded photo pinned to the walls. And I knew, without turning around, that someone was watching me. It was a feeling I'd learned to trust over the years. Shaking it off, I headed behind the counter and set up for the night. The register chimed as I pulled it open, counting bills with practiced ease. At least I wasn't completely alone. Victor, the owner, was upstairs in his office. But he might as well have been on another planet. He only came down when someone really pissed him off. An hour passed. The bar remained nearly empty, save for a lone figure in the farthest booth, nursing a whiskey and keeping to himself. Fine by me. And then, at exactly 1:13 a.m., the front door swung open. A man stepped inside. He was tall, well-groomed, dressed in a sleek black coat that looked far too expensive for this place. His shoes barely made a sound as he approached the counter, moving with a kind of deliberate grace that set my nerves on edge. He had an air of quiet control, like he knew exactly how this night was going to unfold. "Macallan 18, he said, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. I poured the drink and slid it across the bar. He took a sip and regarded me over the rim of his glass. "You been working here long?" I forced a polite smile. "A while." He nodded slowly, like he already knew the answer. "You seem like you're good at reading people." I raised an eyebrow. That a compliment or a warning? His lips curved slightly, but his eyes remained unreadable. Just an observation. For a few minutes, we made small talk. He was charming, disarming, even. But something felt off. It wasn't his words, exactly. It was the way he listened, as if weighing every response. He never looked away, never hesitated, never blinked longer than necessary. And then, just as casually, he asked, "What time do you get off?" My stomach clenched. I knew where this conversation was headed. I had seen it before, the lone man at the bar, the friendly chatter, the subtle shift from curiosity to something more invasive. I gave him a vague answer, hoping to steer the conversation elsewhere. But he only smiled, a knowing smile, like he already had the answer. Then he placed a crisp $100 bill on the bar and slid it forward. "For your trouble." And just like that, he was gone. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Something about him lingered long after he disappeared into the night. A week later, he came back, and he wasn't alone. A woman walked in beside him, tall, poised, striking. Her auburn hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her dress clung to her like a second skin. She was beautiful in that slightly too perfect way, the kind of beauty that made you suspicious. She approached the bar first, resting her manicured hands on the counter as she leaned in with an easy smile. "You're gorgeous," she said. Her voice was smooth, practiced. She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly over my arm as she said it, holding the contact for just a second too long. I forced a laugh. "That's nice of you to say." The man watched in silence, his drink untouched. I recognized the dynamic immediately. Good cop, bad cop. She was the charmer, the one who made the offer seem tempting. He was the silent presence, the one who made sure you felt watched. "You ever think about making some real money?" the woman asked, tilting her head slightly. "We host private events. Exclusive. Safe. The pay is good." Her voice was smooth as honey, but her eyes? Cold. I didn't react. I learned not to. Instead, I gave her a careful smile. I like my job here. Her lips curved, but something in them twitched. A slight falter. She leaned in closer. "You should come outside for a minute. There's someone who can explain it better." I went still. There was no one else in the bar. I would have heard the door open. And yet, I suddenly felt another presence. Something unseen. Waiting. My blood ran cold. "No thanks," I said, my voice firm. The woman's expression didn't change, but her eyes shifted. A slight flicker. A quick, almost imperceptible glance toward the back exit. And then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, they left. I didn't breathe until the door clicked shut behind them. But the moment I exhaled, my skin prickled. I felt it again. That sense of being watched. Slowly, I turned toward the bar's front windows, and that's when I saw it. A black car, parked across the street, engine off, headlights dark. But behind the tinted glass, something was there, something watching, and I had a terrible feeling that this wasn't over. The car across the street didn't move. For several minutes, I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs, watching its shadowy shape through the window. The street lights barely touched it, and I couldn't make out anything beyond the dark-tinted windshield. But I felt it, the presence inside, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move. I wasn't about to wait for whoever was in that car to make the next move. I pulled out my phone under the counter and texted Victor. Don't ask questions. Just come down. Now. The screen showed delivered. No response. My hands clenched into fists. Upstairs was silent. No creaking floorboards. No shuffling of an old man moving from his chair. No sound at all. That wasn't right. Victor was a heavy guy, pushing 70, and every time he moved, the ceiling complained. But now? Nothing. A slow, crawling fear crept up my spine. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he'd gone home early. Maybe. Or maybe something was very, very wrong. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the counter and moved toward the hallway that led to the stairwell. The bar was empty now. The last of the regulars had trickled out an hour ago, leaving me completely alone. Or so I'd thought. I reached the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The door to Victor's office was closed. A faint sliver of yellow light glowed from beneath it. I hesitated. My fingers curled tighter around the bat. Victor. My voice came out too small. Nothing. I took a slow step up, though it groaned beneath my weight. Another step. Then, a sharp, familiar click echoed through the bar. The front door had just locked. My blood froze. Someone was inside with me. I spun, heart slamming against my ribs, and bolted back down the stairs. The bar was still empty. No movement. No sound. But the door. The bolt had been slid into place. From the inside. I wasn't alone. A floorboard creaked. Not from upstairs. Not from the hallway. From behind the bar. I knew I'd been alone there seconds ago. Knew it. Slowly, gripping the bat like my life depended on it, I turned my head toward the counter and saw someone standing behind it. The woman. Her too wide smile gleamed under the dim bar lights. I was hoping you wouldn't run, she said softly. I took an instinctive step back. My pulse roared in my ears. She had gotten inside without a sound. How my throat tightened. How did you get in here? She tilted her head slightly, as if amused by the question. This place has so many little entrances, she murmured. So many cracks to slip through. I wanted to scream for Victor, but my gut already told me what I'd find upstairs. Nothing. I tried to keep my voice steady. You need to leave. She ignored me and moved closer, her hands trailing over the counter like she was memorizing it. You should have taken our offer, she said. I lifted the bat, tightening my grip. You should step back, I warned. She laughed, and that's when I heard it. A soft, slow tap, 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 coming from the hallway behind me. Someone else was here. I spun, bat raised, but the hallway was empty. My breath came out in a shaky burst. When I turned back toward the bar, the woman was gone. The only sound was the faint hum of the jukebox in the corner. My hands trembled. I forced myself to move, stepping back toward the counter, scanning every shadowed corner. And then, a whisper, right next to my ear. Run. I swung the bat, but there was nothing but empty air. The lights flickered, then went out. The bar plunged into darkness. I felt it, more than heard it, the presence surrounding me. Not just the woman. More. Many more. And suddenly, I knew. They had never left. They had been here the whole time. Watching. Waiting. The whispers rose, soft and insidious, curling around me like smoke. Words I didn't understand. A language I had never heard. Something brushed against my neck. I bolted. I didn't think. I didn't stop. I ran straight for the front door, fumbling with the lock. My fingers were shaking too hard to grip it properly. A soft breath against my ear. The lock clicked. The door swung open. I fell into the night, gasping, barely catching myself on the pavement. And then the lights snapped back on inside. The whispers stopped. I turned, heart pounding so hard I thought I might collapse. The bar was empty. No woman. No figures in the shadows. No whispers. The counter was spotless. The bat was back under it, like I had never touched it, like it had all been in my head. But then I saw it. The single glass sitting on the counter. Half full. The ice inside it still melting. Someone had been there, and they'd be back. I didn't quit my job. I should have, but I didn't. Because the next night, when I walked in, Victor was behind the bar. Alive, unharmed, acting like nothing had happened. He greeted me like normal, complained about the jukebox skipping, tossed me the keys and told me to lock up after. And when I asked if he'd gotten my text, he frowned. What text? I checked my phone. It was gone. No messages. No calls. Nothing. And then Victor said something that made my blood turn to ice. By the way, he muttered, "That $100 bill you left on the counter last night? Nice tip. Who left it?" I felt sick. I hadn't left any money on the counter. I hadn't even locked up. I had run. So who had locked the bar after I left? And worse, who had been standing behind the counter where I should have been all night? Story 2. The gas station at the edge of Old Mill Road had always been a strange place. It wasn't abandoned, but it might as well have been. Even during the day, customers rarely stopped by. The neon open sign buzzed weakly in the window, struggling to be noticed against the pitch-black stretch of highway that ran past it. I'd taken the job a month ago. The hours were long, the pay was trash, but it was quiet, and I needed quiet. Night shifts had always suited me. I could be alone, left to my thoughts, with only the occasional trucker or desperate traveler passing through. Most nights, it was just me and the cameras. That was the rule. Always watch the cameras. There were 6 of them. 1 for each gas pump, 2 for the aisles, 1 behind the counter, and 1 pointing directly at the entrance. A tiny black and white screen behind the register let me see them all at once, their grainy footage flickering in and out. The previous guy, a wiry old man named Lou, had left in a hurry. He didn't say why, just muttered something about strange hours and not worth it. I didn't ask questions. I just needed the money. The night it happened, I was halfway through my shift, sipping from a lukewarm energy drink, when I noticed something strange on the monitors. The camera by pump 3 had gone dark. I frowned, tapping the screen. The feed flickered, showing only static. Damn thing was always broken. But then, something moved in the static. I blinked. For a split second, just long enough for my brain to register it, I swore I saw a shape standing just beyond the camera's reach. And then the static cut out entirely. I leaned forward, my pulse kicking up. The other cameras were fine. The gas station was empty, but still something felt wrong. The store was silent, save for the faint buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. Outside, the pump sat untouched beneath the humming glow of the street lamps. And then, a knock. Not from the front door. From the back. My stomach dropped. No one ever used the back door. It led to an alley, just dumpsters and a fence beyond that. Customers weren't allowed back there. Another knock. Louder this time. I grabbed my phone, my fingers hovering over the emergency call button. And then, just as I was about to move, a third knock. But this time, it came from the front door. I snapped my head up. A man stood outside, silhouetted against the dim glow of the street lamp. His face was turned away, his features hidden in the shadows. He was tall, his shoulders slightly hunched, like he was trying to look smaller. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets. I hesitated. "Sir," I called through the glass. He didn't move. I took a step forward, swallowing against the lump in my throat. "We're open if you need something." He stood perfectly still for another second. And then, without a word, he raised his hand. Slowly, deliberately. He pointed, not at me, at the cameras. A sharp chill shot through my spine. I turned instinctively, eyes darting to the monitor behind me. The pump 3 camera was back on. And this time, it wasn't empty. Someone was standing by the pump, facing away. A woman, long hair, barefoot, standing completely still. I turned back to the door. The man was gone. I sucked in a breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I checked the parking lot, empty. The road beyond, empty. I flipped the locks, backing away from the entrance. And then, in the silence, I heard it. A sound that shouldn't have been possible. A slow, rhythmic tapping. Not on the front door. Not on the back door. On the window behind me. The one inside the store. I turned, blood roaring in my ears. There, standing in aisle 3, tapping the glass with one pale finger, was the woman from the camera. She shouldn't have been there. She hadn't entered. The doors had never opened. And yet, she was inside. I staggered back, knocking into the counter. My breathing came in sharp, shallow bursts. The woman's head tilted unnaturally to the side. Tap, tap, tap. Her lips didn't move. but I heard her voice. Soft, almost playful. Come outside. I shook my head. She pressed her palm to the glass. I need your help, she whispered. I looked at the cameras. The one on pump 3 still showed her standing outside, but she was inside the store. At the same time, I turned back, and she was gone. The glass was still warm where her hand had been. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, the power went out. The store was plunged into darkness. The hum of the lights disappeared. The monitors died. The silence was absolute. And then, just as the fear settled deep into my chest, the register opened. On its own. A single receipt curled out from the printer, sliding onto the counter. I picked it up with shaking fingers, scanning the paper under the dim emergency light. It wasn't a receipt. It was a message. A single sentence, typed neatly across the strip of paper. Do not leave. Do not let them in. And then, before I could even process it, a new sound. The slow creak of a door swinging open. Not the front door. Not the back door. But the supply closet. The one that had been locked all night. The one right behind me. And from the darkness inside, something breathed. Something waiting. Something that had been here the whole time. The supply closet door yawned open into a pit of darkness. I stood frozen behind the counter, my pulse pounding in my throat. The emergency lights cast flickering shadows across the tile floor, and from inside that pitch-black room, I heard it breathing. Slow. Shallow. Not mine. Something was in there. Or worse, had been in there the whole time. I should have run. I should have bolted for the front door, torn across the empty parking lot, and never looked back. But instead, I grabbed the box cutter from beneath the register, gripping it so tight my knuckles turned white. And then, a single footstep. From inside the closet. I backed away slowly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The darkness inside the room felt alive, shifting, stretching toward me. And then, in the silence, something moved. A hand. Pale fingers curled around the doorframe, gripping it too hard, the nails digging into the wood. A second hand followed. Then a face. Not human. Its eyes were too wide. Its mouth stretched into something that barely resembled a grin. It didn't have lips. Just a slit of darkness where a mouth should be. And it was looking right at me. A sound gurgled up from its throat. A whisper. No, not a whisper. A laugh. Low. Amused. Hungry. It knew me. I don't remember moving, but suddenly, I was running. I crashed into the shelves behind me, knocking over an entire display of snacks. My hands fumbled at the register, searching for something, anything, I could use as a weapon. And then the power snapped back on. Just like that, the store was bright again. The monitors flickered back to life. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. And the supply closet door? Closed. Like it had never been opened in the first place. My stomach lurched. I glanced at the security feed, my hands still trembling. The Pump 3 camera had gone out again. The static pulsed on the screen, warping in and out. And then, a figure emerged from it. Not the woman from before. Something else. A man, tall and thin, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His arms hung limply at his sides, swaying as if he were suspended by invisible strings. He was standing in the exact spot where the woman had been. But she was gone. And then, slowly, his head turned. Not toward the camera. Toward me. I staggered back, nearly knocking over the register. This wasn't possible. He was watching me through the camera. Like he could see me. The static grew louder, buzzing in my ears. Then, the man stepped forward. Not on the screen. Inside the store. I turned my head, my breath catching in my throat. And there he was, standing 3 feet away. I didn't hear him enter. I didn't see him move. He had just appeared. His skin was raw and pale and waxy, stretched too tight over his skull. His clothes looked old, like they'd been left out in the rain for weeks. And his eyes. God, his eyes. They were empty. Just black pits, bottomless and hungry. He smiled, but his lips didn't move. His entire body was too still, as if he wasn't breathing. Then, in a voice that wasn't his, he whispered, "You let her in." I sucked in a breath, and that's when I heard it. The softest sound. Like fabric rustling. Behind me. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see. But my body betrayed me. I turned, and the woman was standing behind the counter, right where I should have been. She smiled. "You should run now." I didn't hesitate. I bolted for the front door, slamming my hand against the push bar. The glass shuddered under my weight, but it didn't budge. It wouldn't open. Something was holding it shut. I whirled around. The man was gone. The woman was gone, but the store wasn't empty. I could feel them. I wasn't alone. Something whispered in my ear. Not English, not words. Something older. Something that didn't belong here. And then, the door unlocked. On its own. I didn't question it. I ran. I sprinted across the parking lot, barely feeling my feet hit the pavement. I dove into my car, hands shaking as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was behind me. I peeled out onto the empty highway, the gas station shrinking in my rearview mirror. And then, as I reached the bend in the road, my phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. My stomach twisted as I read the words on the screen. See you tomorrow. My vision blurred. I looked up and nearly slammed on the brakes. Because there, on the side of the road, standing beneath a flickering street lamp, was the woman, smiling, waiting. And as I sped past, I saw something in the rearview mirror. The gas station. The lights were off again. The monitors had gone dark. And standing inside, behind the counter, watching me leave, was myself. I never went back to the gas station. Never called. Never checked in. I left town 2 days later. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving down an empty stretch of road, my phone buzzes. Always from an unknown number. And the message is always the same. See you soon. Story 3. The worst part about working the graveyard shift at a Walmart wasn't the boredom. It wasn't the flickering fluorescent lights or the stale, recycled air. It wasn't even the way the aisles seemed longer at night. The rows of neatly stacked products stretching endlessly under the artificial glow. No, the worst part was the people. Not the truckers stopping in for last-minute supplies, or the single moms shopping in their pajamas, their kids half asleep in the cart. I mean the other ones. The ones that didn't belong there. The ones that seemed to wander in from nowhere, appearing between the shelves like they'd been waiting. The ones who never bought anything. And the ones who didn't leave. I didn't notice him at first. I was stocking shelves in the electronics section, lost in my usual half-conscious haze, stacking up wireless chargers no one ever seemed to buy. My shift was nearly over. Another hour, maybe 2, and I'd be home in bed, free from the eerie silence that seemed to settle over the store after midnight. But then I glanced up, and he was there, standing at the end of the aisle. Not moving, not blinking, just watching me. I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine. It wasn't the first time I'd caught someone staring at me in the store. It was a 24-hour Walmart, after all. Weird people showed up all the time. But something about this man was off. He was tall, too tall, almost unnaturally so, his limbs slightly too long for his frame. His clothes were normal enough, a dark hoodie, jeans, sneakers, but the way he stood made my skin crawl. He didn't look like he was browsing. He looked like he had been standing there the whole time, like he had been waiting for me to notice him. I cleared my throat, forcing a polite smile. Can I help you find something? He didn't move, didn't blink. For a full 5 seconds, he just stared. Then, finally, he spoke. A single word. No. His voice was wrong. Flat. Emotionless. Like someone trying to mimic human speech, but not quite getting it right. I nodded slowly, gripping the edge of the cart. All right, let me know if you need anything. And then I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I wanted to, but I didn't. Because something in my gut told me that if I ran, if I acknowledged the fear pounding in my chest, he would follow. I spent the next hour avoiding him. Every time I glanced up, he was closer. Not walking, I never saw him move. Just closer. Standing at the edge of another aisle. Lingering just out of sight. And always staring. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was a shoplifter, scoping out the store. Maybe he was on something. Maybe he was just a weird guy with no concept of personal space. But then something happened that I couldn't explain. I turned a corner, pretending not to notice him, and ran straight into someone else. A woman, mid-30s, dark hair, dressed casually, but something was wrong. She grabbed my wrist before I could react. You need to leave, she whispered, voice tight. I stared at her. What? She squeezed harder. Now. I yanked my arm away, my heart pounding. Lady, what the hell? And then she did something that stopped me cold. She turned her head, just slightly, and looked at him. The man in the hoodie. Her expression didn't change. But I saw it. The fear in her eyes. Like she knew him. Like she knew exactly what he was. And then, the lights went out. All at once. The entire store plunged into darkness. And somewhere, in the pitch-black silence, I heard footsteps. Slow. Measured. Moving toward me. Not hers. His. The footsteps didn't stop. They echoed through the pitch-black aisles, slow and deliberate, the sound distorted by the emptiness of the store. The woman was gone. I didn't hear her run. I didn't hear her move. She had just disappeared. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. My fingers gripped the edge of the shelf, the metal biting into my palm. And then, the footsteps stopped. I wasn't alone in the darkness. I could feel him, standing just behind me, watching. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, a whisper, right against my ear. "You shouldn't be here." I spun, swinging blindly. My hand struck empty air. The lights snapped back on. The store was empty. No customers. No workers. No man in the hoodie. The only sound was the hum of the overhead lights flickering back to life. The registers were still. The security desk was empty. Even the self-checkout machines, which always had a robotic voice announcing, "Please place your item in the bagging area," were silent. I was alone, but something was wrong. The air felt thick, like I was standing in a room that had been sealed off for years. And then, as I turned back toward the front of the store, I froze. Every single TV screen in the electronics section had turned on, all at once, all playing the same grainy, flickering footage of me, standing in the aisle. But I wasn't moving. I was just staring at the camera, my own face, expressionless, lifeless. And then, I blinked. Not me. The version of me on the screen. It blinked. A second before I actually did. Like it knew what I was going to do before I did it. A cold wave of nausea rolled through my stomach. I stepped back, and then the intercom crackled to life. A voice. Flat. Monotone. Not mine. Not anyone I recognized. But it knew my name. "You need to leave now, my name." He is already inside. My throat locked up. I took another step back. And then, I saw him, standing at the end of the aisle. The man in the hoodie. Only, he wasn't wearing the hoodie anymore. And his face was mine. I ran. My feet pounded against the tile, the shelves blurring past as I sprinted for the exit. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I just ran. The doors were locked. I slammed into them, yanking at the handles. The automatic sensors were off. I was trapped. Behind me, the overhead lights began flickering again. I turned, my chest rising and falling in quick, panicked gasps. He was closer now, standing just a few aisles away. The version of me. His arms hung limp at his sides. His eyes were wrong. Not black, not empty, just wrong, like they weren't supposed to be there. Like he wasn't supposed to exist. And then he moved. Not walked. Not ran. Shifted. Like the space around him warped, dragging him forward in glitching, unnatural bursts. I clutched at the door handles, my knuckles turning white. "You're not real," I whispered. His head snapped sideways, his mouth pulling into a too-wide grin. "Neither are you." And then the lights went out again. I don't know how I got out. The next thing I remember, I was outside, standing in the empty parking lot, gasping for breath. The Walmart was dark behind me. No lights. No movement. The doors were wide open, like they had never been locked in the first place. I turned to my car, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking too hard to grip them properly. I looked at my reflection in the window. My face was pale, eyes wide, hair slightly disheveled, but normal, just me. And then I heard it. The automatic doors sliding open behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see who, or what, had followed me out. I threw myself into the car, turned the key, and peeled out of the parking lot. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. I quit my job the next morning. Never went back. Never answered their calls. Never explained why. I didn't care. Because something had left that store with me. Something that looked like me. And sometimes, late at night, when I catch my reflection in a dark window, I have to remind myself that it's really me, and not the thing that walked out of that Walmart pretending to be.